Greetings, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. Behind me is the house of Leslie Hore Belisha. So, Hore Belisha was born in London in 1893. His father was a prosperous Jewish businessman. The family had moved to the UK not many generations before. Leslie Hore Belisha, he went to Clifton College, which is just outside Bristol. Which is quite a well-known public school, and had a boarding house specifically for Jewish boys. If they wanted to be there, they could be provided with kosher food and so forth. It doesn't exist anymore, that Jewish boarding house. The school is still there, because the British Jewish community is heavily London-based, and there's lots of the Jewish day schools here in London. There was even a Jewish boarding school in Oxfordshire which closed in '97. Anyway, about Leslie Hore Belisha, he then went to Oxford University. He qualified as a barrister, and he joined the Liberal Party. So he was elected an MP at the age of 30 for a Plymouth constituency. Anyhow, the Liberal Party really in 1923 was slipping into its doldrums. The Labour Party had supplanted it as the major party of opposition, and there was the Conservative Party, which was in government most of the time. So the Liberals also battling it out between Asquith Liberals and Lloyd George Liberals. And by the 1930s, it was a hopeless situation of having three factions of the Liberal Party, also Simonite Liberals versus Samuelite Liberals. There were no more Asquith Liberals by that stage. Anyway, so he then went to join the Labour Party, seeing that this was the future of progressive politics, and he remained an MP. So he was Secretary of State for War in 1939. We'd call that Defence Secretary these days. And so because there was more or less a coalition. Remember, 1931, the national government was formed. James Ramsay MacDonald, the Labour leader's Prime Minister, but the MPs serving under him were mostly Conservative. A handful of Labour MPs and a handful of Liberal MPs. That was the national government. The great bulk of the Labour Party were against Ramsay MacDonald. Indeed, they expelled him from Labour. His faction of Labour was called National Labour, and so on. And the Liberals were split on this issue, whether to support or oppose the national government. But Hore Belisha supported it. The idea being it's the Great Depression, we all need to pull together here, there needs to be retrenchment, otherwise there'll be complete financial collapse and a run on the pound and all the rest of it. The UK had gone off the gold standard. Up until that time, you could go into a bank with gold and get some money, or go in with pounds sterling, pennies, shillings, or whatever, and get some gold. So it gave people confidence in the currency. They trusted it was real, because of course when paper money was brought in the 17th century, people hadn't really believed it. But the gold standard, well, that's gone the way of all flesh. Anyway, so the Second World War broke out when he was Secretary of State for War. So obviously he occupied a crucial position, but some people were against him. And there was a considerable amount of anti-Semitism in the UK at that time. I mean, no Jewish person had been murdered for his faith for centuries, but there was some low-level prejudice. It mustn't be exaggerated, because of course there were members of Parliament who were Jewish, and of all parties, Conservative, Labour and Liberal parties all had Jewish MPs. But unfortunately there was Sir Oswald Mosley's party, the British Union fascists going around, and they were disseminating the most foul anti-Semitic tropes. So some of the soldiers sang a song about him to the tune of "Onward, Christian Soldiers." It was "Onward, British Soldiers, onward as to war. Israel, Hore Belisha, will lead you from behind." Obviously mangled the lyrics a bit, but the idea that he was the hindmost and he wasn't going to risk himself, as in they were dying for Jewish people. But thing is, Secretary of State Defence is a civilian, Secretary of State for War as it was in those days, and no, he doesn't have to put himself in harm's way. Nobody would expect that. No other Secretary of State for War ever went to any danger zone. But there we are. He resigned in 1940 because he was clashing with Viscount Gort, an Irish aristocrat who's one of the most senior officers in the British Army. But he remained in Parliament for quite some years after that. He's also responsible for Belisha beacons, those big flashing lights beside a zebra crossing to indicate where it is, to give you a good chance to cross. They're named in his honour, but people hardly ever call those things Belisha beacons anymore. So this is his house. Apparently it's a very fine house inside. I can't remember which very distinguished artist he had redesigned the entrance hall. So he died in 1957. Leslie Hore Belisha is then ennobled. He was Lord Hore Belisha, a figure who deserves to be better known.